only one who can stop him. Hurry, Michael. Go through the...
If ambition alone made things good, this would be the greatest video game ever made, and that's because it wants to be so much. It wants to be Halo for the Wii. It wants to break ground for online multiplayer on a console without much online multiplayer. It wants to be great. But although it does a lot of things right, this game can't quite achieve its own lofty goals. And it's a pity, too, because it comes so very close to being great. This is the Conduit 2 for the Nintendo Wii. One of the only notable third-party Wii games of 2011, Conduit 2 is a sequel to the 2009 original, The Conduit. Whether they played it or not, Wii owners should remember that game well. It was one of the most hyped Wii games to date, if only because the team at High Voltage Software was putting genuine effort into it. Unfortunately, that massive hype was perhaps the Conduit's biggest obstacle. And so here we are, 2 years after the original Conduit, looking down the alien rifle scope at a sequel. And if nothing else, High Voltage Software and Sega deserve immense credit for putting their resources into a Wii game of this caliber in 2011. And personally, as a Wii owner who loves the system and sees yet untapped potential there, it's very much appreciated. But again, great ambition and great intention doesn't necessarily make a great game. Conduit 2 picks up in the immediate aftermath of the original. Michael Ford is still on a chase for John Adams, some jerk who wants to use the power of an alien race for his own nefarious purposes. And it's again up to Ford to take down Adams in a story that frankly never has much appeal. This is a shooter in a very old school vein, focusing more on giving players cool ways to shoot aliens than telling them cool stories about aliens. To start with what the game does well, Conduit 2 is all about the gameplay. The levels are laid out like an action movie, stringing together enemy ambushes and gunfights with very brief cutscenes, and that keeps the action dense and really fast-paced. This is a shooter that doesn't spare targets or ammunition, but it furthers that action with an assembly of characters that is, unfortunately, far less enjoyable. And that's one of my chief complaints about Conduit 2. For everything that looks awesome, there's something that looks generic, and in most cases, those are the enemies. The character design in this game is really hit and miss, and when it misses, Conduit 2 misses by a mile. Fortunately, when it hits, it does make an impact, and the bosses in particular are tremendous, serving as some of the best examples of the game's technical savvy. Conduit 2 is proof that Wii games can look awesome. But there are two things Conduit 2 does even better: control and weaponry. High Voltage's efforts prove that, objectively speaking, the Wii Remote is the best way to control an FPS on a console. If you're used to thumbsticks though, Conduit 2 also supports the classic controller. And no matter which way you go, you'll be shooting some of the coolest freaking weapons I've ever seen in a shooter. You see, Conduit 2 features a mixture of both alien and human weapons. But once you gun down an enemy with an alien plasma cannon, and you load it with some kind of gross alien orb, oh man, you'll never want to use a 9mm once again. This stuff is awesome. But to give a definitive review of this game, you have to use a lot of qualifiers. If you're into shooters and you play lots of them, this game's gonna feel generic to you, there's no denying that. But for Wii owners, people faithful to a system that is constantly neglected and really lacks great online shooters, Conduit 2 is at least a taste of what the system could have been. It's not a great game, but it wants to be. And on the Wii, a little ambition goes a long way.